there, but I happen to know that for a while she was a bus driver. And I've often wondered, reading her stories, her fine police procedurals, as they're called, I've often wondered if you wrote most of those while you were driving around the city picking up and dispensing passengers, or if not.
It should probably plead the fifth, because you're supposed to pay attention when you're driving the bus.
How big was this bus you were driving?
About 47 feet.
It's a big city bus.
Big city bus, yeah. Well, actually, it was in a small city, but...
The big bus.
The big bus.
Yeah, just as...
Actually, they're much easier to parallel park than a small car. You can see better.
Sure. I believe that.
So, your first book, The Man Who Loved Cats.
The Man Who Understood Cats.
The Man Who Understood Cats. Published in 1993?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. About a Chicago homicide investigator named John Finnis.
Finnis.
That's the way you pronounce that? And there are 5 Finnis books.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about that, The Man Who Understood Cats, The Man Who Loved Cats, I want to get into the whole business of why those titles are there, because I know they're your titles. But one of the things about, and they're published, by the way, by
St. Martin's.
St. Martin's, yeah, has to do with there's a very strong family component that runs through all of those books. Why is that?
Well, I think that there's a strong stereotype in literature and mostly in movies about the lone detective who drinks too much and his wife is leaving him and all that. So I started out with that. I originally started The Man Who Understood Cats as a screenplay for a screenwriting course. And so you know, they say you should have conflict. So, okay, I'll start out with the stereotypical detective who's drinks too much and has trouble with his wife. And then I'll, like, change it a little bit and actually throw in another character who's guaranteed to be the antithesis of this middle-class, typical, stereotypical detective. And just for the hell of it, because I didn't really plan to have a sequel or a series, I made him a gay shrink. Because I figured that would be, this is before profiling was a big deal, and it seemed like that would be, you know, at that time the police were pretty suspicious of head doctors in general, and the police, the traditional police, were pretty homophobic until the gay community got to be really big voters in Chicago. So that's how it started out, but the stereotypes are never too interesting, so I had to make them, you know, make them real people, round them out.
But why a cop?
It was for a screenplay, you know, and it was supposed to.
Okay.
You have to have conflict, and I had seen a movie, a cop buddy film that it started out to be a great one, and then it just turned into nothing but chases and mindless violence that didn't really have much of a purpose.
Was this something that actually got made?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was quite popular. It's still being duplicated. But I just thought, I walked out of the theater thinking they'd gotten the first reel of the movie mixed up with the second reel of the movie mixed up with another film, because it started out so well and it started out character driven and it ended up being driven by, you know,
chase scenes.
Studio execs probably came in and started making decisions.
So,
you write Cop Talk as well as, or probably better than, almost anybody I've ever read. How did you do that?
Well, I had a job for 30 years where I hung around blue-collar guys and listened to them talk, and then I started eavesdropping on police officers every chance I got and interviewing them.
The ones that pulled you over when you were driving the bus?
No, they usually don't bother bus drivers unless you do, like, run over a pedestrian or something.
Yeah. A potential client.
Yeah.
But you've got a good ear.
That's it.
Well, because it's almost like a sub-dialect of English that's just, I think Connie Fletcher describes it in one of her wonderful books as Anglo-Saxon poetry. And it really is they have so many colorful names for things, and some of them have such a wonderful way of expressing themselves.
You also research in a way that many of us don't research. You, in fact, did a degree in criminal.
Well, I didn't start out to do that. I took a course in police procedure. And just because I knew, when I first started out, all I knew about police was from my very infrequent contacts with them on, out on the street, and what I saw on TV, which I understood was just nonsense. So I took a police procedure course, and it was taught.
Was that
community college?
Okay.
They're wonderful places. You get a great education for a whole lot less than someplace like Northwest.
Aren't there some police departments that allow just a civilian to come in and take a course?
Well, I also went to my
they?
local police academy, Citizens Police Academy, and that. But I started out with one course, and it was taught by a former police officer who now has 2 master's degrees. And it was so interesting that I signed up for the next course. And then the next course. And after I'd taken about 6 courses, I thought, well, I might as well take the last few courses and get the degree.
Did you do this as a result of your interest in writing police procedure?
Yes.
So they were part and parcel of the whole thing. But how did you decide initially? Do you remember?
Well, I initially wrote this screenplay, and nobody would look at it. So someone suggested make it into a novel. Well, that's a whole lot more of a big deal than a screenplay, and I think you also have to have the kind of details that make it sound authentic. And so I took these courses that gave me a basic information about police procedure, and then I compiled a list of questions that I needed to answer to accurately portray the Chicago Police Department in my novel. And a friend of mine hooked me up with a police sergeant who worked part-time as a security guard. So he had a lot of time to sit around and not, just be there. And so I took this list of questions, and for every question that I asked him, he gave me about a page worth of notes, because he would tell me all these things I didn't even think to ask.
Wow.
And of course, I think almost any subject, whether it's insects or model railroads, the more you know about something, the more interesting it becomes to you. So pretty soon, you start picking up every time there's a story on the news about the police doing this or that, or you see a police car on the street near your house, you have to walk over and see what they're doing, because it's it's very interesting, and it just eventually you build, if you do this long enough, you build up a large body of information about the subject.
But now you're sort of starting over on lawyers and trials, and aren't you doing more of that now?
I actually, when I moved into the city of Chicago has this community active policing where they encourage citizens to come and meet their local beat officers and tell them any problems that they have. And they were asking for court advocates, which as far as I can tell is, they give you this little badge that gets you parking and gets you into the court, and you're supposed to wear it. And when you go to a trial, it just lets the defendant and the people in the court know that there's someone from the community who's interested in seeing this trial. And not all the defendants are guilty. Sometimes innocent people are brought in.
The fact that you're there, your presence in the courtroom, kind of keeps some people at least on their toes.
I think so. And sometimes there was one instance where I sat through the murder trial. A woman had been traveling from one area to another, and she had to cross a gang boundary, and I guess women can do that, but the guy that she'd been visiting on one side of the boundary had walked her to as far as the edge of his territory, and then he couldn't go any farther without getting himself killed. And so she proceeded on by herself, and she was subsequently attacked and murdered. And that had been about 1.5 years before the case came to trial. When this trial was actually put on, there were, in the gallery, I was there, the victim advocate from the state's attorney's office was there, and the victim's mother. Those were the only people that sat through that trial and that weren't part of the proceedings. And the mother came up to me afterwards, and she was just about in tears, and she was just so happy that there was one other person who came to this trial and was interested that her daughter had been murdered and that somebody cared about this fact.
Wow.
Talk a little bit about the other books. Specifically, the fact is that, I mean, because you've done not just police procedurals, but you've done something called White Tiger, something called The Fall, something called The Simmery Ring, and another one that we'll talk called Death in West Wheeling, which is so totally different than all these others that it's going to require a whole separate interview, I think. Why all these? I mean, you're going along with Thinnes and this, and the psychiatrist.
Well, White Tiger grew out of the original